They called her the Nightingale of New Orleans. The Blue Canary Club crackled with energy on that humid September night in 1953. Cigarette smoke curled through golden spotlights as patrons leaned forward in their seats, cocktails forgotten in their hands. On stage, Evelyn Hart stood alone in the halo of a single spotlight, her sequined midnight blue gown catching fragments of light like a constellation. She was 27, at the height of her powers, though few in the audience noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, carefully masked with powder. "For my final number tonight," she said, her voice a warm caress that floated over the hushed crowd. "A song I've been saving." The pianist, Clara Fielding, hesitated for just a moment. This wasn't on their set list, but as Evelyn nodded, Clara's fingers found the keys. The opening notes of "The River Stays Silent" filled the room, a song Evelyn had never performed live before. Time Weekly had called her voice the heartache of the South. But that description fell short of what happened when Evelyn sang. Her voice didn't just evoke emotion, it transformed it, reshaping sorrow into something beautiful, without diminishing its truth. The club clock read 11:47 p.m. as she closed her eyes and began. The river flows dark and deep, carrying secrets it promised to keep. In the wings, Victor Lane watched, his hand gripping a glass of bourbon too tightly. At 42, he had the polished appearance of success, tailored suit, manicured nails, and a smile that never reached his eyes. As Evelyn's manager, he had built her career from nothing, discovered her singing in a church choir in Mississippi, molded her into what he called marketable heartbreak. What the audience couldn't see was how his jaw clenched as Evelyn strayed from the planned set list, how his knuckles whitened around his glass. In the front row, a young journalist from the Times-Picayune scribbled notes. Later, he would write, "Hart's final performance carried a strange, prophetic weight, as though she were singing not just to us, but to history itself. None of us knew it would be the last time anyone would hear her voice in public." When the song ended, the silence lasted 3 full seconds before the applause erupted. Evelyn bowed once, twice, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. No encore, though the audience clamored. She simply waved, turned, and walked off stage. The time was 11:58 p.m. By midnight, Evelyn Hart had vanished. By dawn, her dressing room had become a museum of final moments. Half-empty glass of water with a perfect crescent of lipstick on the rim, a folded sheet of lyrics, and a contract torn neatly in two. Detective Samuel Brooks arrived at 9:17 a.m., already sweating through his shirt in the New Orleans heat. At 45, Brooks had seen enough missing persons cases to know when one felt wrong. This one did. He stood in Evelyn's dressing room, notebook open, speaking to Daisy Williams, the wardrobe assistant who discovered the empty room. "Tell me again what time you last saw Miss Hart," Brooks said, pencil poised. "She was still in costume, so it must have been just after midnight. She seemed fine, tired, but smiling." Daisy twisted her handkerchief. "She asked if I'd bring her purse from the costume room. When I came back 10 minutes later, she was gone. And the purse? Still there, next morning. That's what's strange. Her lipstick, her wallet, everything still inside. $43 in cash. Who leaves without their purse?" Brooks jotted this down. Already the case had contradictions. 2 staff members, the bartender and a waiter, claimed they'd seen Evelyn leaving with Victor Lane, heading toward his Cadillac. But the night janitor, the stage manager, and Daisy all insisted she'd left alone. Most troubling was the contract found torn in half on her vanity table. New terms for her upcoming tour, the signature line ripped clean through, as if Evelyn had made her final business decision before disappearing. As Brooks questioned the band members, Clara Fielding, the pianist, kept shaking her head. She wasn't herself lately. Kept humming the same 4 notes before every song, an A minor fall. Like this. Clara touched the piano keys. 4 descending notes that seemed to hang in the air. What does that mean? Brooks asked. Clara's eyes welled with tears. I don't know, but just before that last number, she leaned over and whispered something. She said, if this one goes missing, they'll find all of me in it. Outside, the Mississippi River flowed past, indifferent to the human drama unfolding alongside it. Brooks found himself staring at its muddy waters as he left the club. Like the river, Evelyn seemed to have been swallowed by the city itself, absorbed into its shadows without leaving a ripple to mark her passing. What Brooks didn't know yet was that the most important clue wasn't in what Evelyn had left behind, but in what she'd hidden in plain sound, in music meant to outlast her own disappearance. Detective Samuel Brooks had seen his share of missing persons in 15 years with the New Orleans Police Department. Most turned up within days, sleeping off a bender in some hotel, hiding from debts, or starting fresh with a new lover. Performers were particularly prone to dramatic exits, but something about Evelyn Hart's disappearance nagged at him. People who ran away took things with them: money, identification, mementos. Evelyn had left everything behind. I'm telling you, she's been talking about getting away for months. Victor Lane sat in Brooks's office, one leg crossed over the other, a cigarette dangling between manicured fingers. The pressure was getting to her. Critics, fans, schedules. Evelyn was fragile. Brooks studied Lane carefully. The manager's concern seemed practiced, a performance of its own. Mr. Lane, we found a torn contract in her dressing room. Your contract. Any idea why she might have destroyed it? Something flickered behind Lane's eyes, so quick Brooks almost missed it. Artists are temperamental. We had a small disagreement about touring dates, nothing serious. By morning, she would have signed. He leaned forward. Detective, I've invested 3 years in Evelyn's career. Why would I do anything to harm my most valuable asset? Asset. Not artist, not person. Asset. Brooks nodded, making a note. Where were you between midnight and 2 a.m.? At home. Alone, unfortunately. Lane's smile was smooth as mercury. My housekeeper arrived at 7 a.m. and can confirm I was there. That afternoon, Brooks interviewed Clara Fielding in a quiet corner of Preservation Hall. The pianist's hands trembled slightly as she lit a cigarette. Evelyn was afraid, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just nervous, terrified. For weeks, she'd been jumpy, looking over her shoulder. She stopped taking her usual routes home. Did she say why? Clara hesitated. Not directly, but a month ago after rehearsal, I found her crying in the dressing room. She said, he owns everything, Clara. My songs, my voice, my face. Even my name isn't mine anymore. You think she was talking about Lane? Who else? The contract gave him rights to everything. Recordings, performances, even her stage name. Evelyn Hart isn't even her real name. It's Elizabeth Harper. Did you know that? Clara's eyes grew distant. The night she disappeared, she told me she was planning to break free, take back what was hers. A chill ran through Brooks despite the heat. How was she going to do that? She'd been recording something in secret, something that would prove, I don't know what exactly. But she said it was insurance. The investigation expanded. Search teams combed the French Quarter, dragged sections of the Mississippi, interviewed anyone who'd had contact with Evelyn. Her photograph appeared in papers across Louisiana. Nothing. 5 days after her disappearance, Brooks received a call from Marcus Reynolds, an audio technician at WJBW Radio. The man spoke quickly, nervously. I wasn't supposed to say anything, but I can't sleep. Miss Hart came to the station the night she vanished. Must have been around 1 a.m., asked to use the recording booth off hours, said it was urgent. Brooks was already reaching for his coat. Did she say why? No, sir, but she looked resolute. Scared but determined, you know? Paid me $20 to keep quiet and let her in for an hour. I needed the money, so I agreed. What did she record? That's the thing. She took the tape with her when she left around 2 a.m., said it was her insurance policy. I assumed she meant against her manager. Everyone in the business knows Lane is a shark. Did anyone else see her there? Reynolds paused. No, but someone called for her while she was in the booth. A man. When I told him she was recording, he hung up immediately. The pieces weren't fitting together. If Evelyn had made a recording, where was it now? And if she'd left the radio station at 2 a.m., where had she gone afterward? Brooks returned to the Blue Canary Club, this time with a search warrant. In the office behind the stage, he found financial records showing discrepancies between Evelyn's contracted earnings and what she'd been paid. Pages of royalty statements revealed that songs credited solely to Lane had originally been written by Evelyn. Most telling was a hidden folder containing letters from Evelyn to an attorney, inquiring about breaking her contract on grounds of fraudulent accounting and coercion. The club owner, Henry Duval, had been surprisingly forthcoming once the warrant was produced. Look, detective, everyone knew Victor was skimming from her earnings. That's how the business works. But Evelyn was starting to fight back. She'd hired an attorney secretly. Some guy from Chicago who specialized in contract disputes. When was this? A few weeks ago. Victor found out somehow and was furious. I overheard them arguing in his office. He told her she'd never perform again if she tried to leave him. That sounds like a threat, Duval shrugged. In this business, it's just Tuesday. As Brooks drove back to the station, the pieces began shifting in his mind. Not a voluntary disappearance, not a random crime. Something deliberate. And Lane was at the center of it. The next morning, Brooks requested a warrant for Lane's arrest on suspicion of Evelyn's disappearance. The district attorney refused. You've got financial motives, detective, but no evidence of actual harm, the DA explained wearily. No body, no crime scene, no witnesses to any violence. Half your witnesses saw her leave with him. Half say she left alone. And Lane's too well connected for us to move without solid evidence. Brooks slammed his fist on the desk. By the time we find that evidence, it'll be too late. His words proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, Victor Lane sold his interests in the Blue Canary Club, closed his New Orleans office, and relocated to Chicago. He told associates he couldn't bear to remain in the city after Evelyn's tragic breakdown and departure from public life. Within a month, the case was officially classified as a missing person investigation, not a homicide. Without a body or evidence of violence, the legal system reached its limits. Gradually, Evelyn Hart faded from headlines and public memory, becoming just another mysterious disappearance in a city known for them. Detective Brooks never closed the file. For years, he followed leads, traced Lane's activities in Chicago, and kept searching for the recording Evelyn had made that night, the insurance policy that might have contained the truth. He never found it. Samuel Brooks died in 1989, still haunted by the one case he couldn't solve, the vanishing of a voice that had once silenced rooms with its beauty, now silenced forever. What no one realized was that Evelyn's voice wasn't gone. It was waiting, hidden in a dusty box in an abandoned radio station, labeled simply Evelyn, Last Take. 70 years would pass before anyone heard it again. Noah Grant checked his watch as he navigated the debris-strewn hallway of the condemned WLRK radio building. At 32, he had the wiry build of someone who forgot to eat when deep in research, and the perpetually distracted air of a man whose mind operated on multiple tracks simultaneously. "We've only got a few hours before the demolition crew wants us out," called Vanessa Liu, the head archivist. "Anything worth saving, take it now. Otherwise, it's all going to the landfill tomorrow." Noah nodded, adjusting his dust mask. As a cultural journalist specializing in forgotten music history, he'd volunteered to help salvage what he could from the historic Baton Rouge AM station before its scheduled demolition. Most of the valuable archives had already been transferred to the Louisiana Music Collection, but this final sweep might uncover overlooked treasures. The station had been shuttered for a decade, victim to changing media landscapes and corporate consolidation. Water damage stained the ceilings, mold crept along baseboards. Noah moved carefully through what had once been the tape library, flicking his flashlight over shelves of decaying cardboard boxes. In a far corner, behind a collapsed section of drywall, he spotted a metal cabinet that had been sealed with duct tape. Curious, he pried it open. Inside sat a single cardboard box labeled "Misc Jazz, Don't Use." Noah's pulse quickened. These forgotten archives often held the most interesting material. He lifted the box, surprised by its lightness, and carried it to the temporary table they'd set up in what had once been the recording booth. Inside were a dozen reel-to-reel tapes, most unlabeled, but one, wrapped carefully in waxed paper, caught his attention. The label read, "Evelyn, last take, 11:53. "Vanessa," he called. "Do you know who Evelyn Hart was?" The archivist looked up from her inventory. "The jazz singer who disappeared? Sure. My grandmother had all her records. Why?" Noah held up the reel. "I think I just found something that shouldn't exist." 40 minutes later, they had set up the old woolen sack tape player in Vanessa's apartment. The machine hummed to life, and they held their breath as the tape began to play. Static crackled, then cleared. A woman's voice, low and intimate. "This is Evelyn. November 19th, 1953, final recording." Noah felt goosebumps rise on his arms. The date, it was the night she vanished. When the singing began, Noah and Vanessa exchanged stunned glances. The voice was extraordinary, rich with emotion that seemed to rise from some bottomless well of feeling. But it wasn't the quality that made it remarkable. It was the intimacy, as if Evelyn were singing directly to them across the decades. "This isn't on any catalog," Vanessa whispered. "Believe me, I would know." Noah nodded. Transfixed, the song wasn't one he recognized from her known recordings. It had no instrumental backing, just Evelyn and what sounded like a lone piano, played so softly it was almost a ghost beneath her voice. But then, between verses, something made Noah sit up straight. A whisper so faint he almost missed it. "I can't stay." "Did you hear that?" he asked, but Vanessa was already reaching for the controls, rewinding. They listened again. There it was, unmistakable now that they were listening for it. "I can't stay." And later, another whispered fragment. "He'll find this." More anomalies emerged as they continued. A door creaked mid-verse. A telephone rang faintly in the background, unusual for a professional recording. The microphone captured what sounded like movement, as if Evelyn herself were adjusting it while singing. Most puzzling was the timestamp on the tape's label, 2:17 a.m., November 20, 1953. Hours after her reported disappearance from the Blue Canary Club. If she made this recording after she supposedly vanished, Vanessa began, then the whole narrative about her disappearance is wrong, Noah finished. She didn't vanish from the club. She left deliberately to make this recording. They listened to the entire reel 3 more times. With each playthrough, Noah became more convinced they'd found something extraordinary. This wasn't just a forgotten song. It was a deliberate message, recorded by a woman who knew she was in danger. "I need to research this," Noah said, already making notes. The timing, the whispers, the way she emphasizes certain words. It's like she encoded something into the performance itself. Vanessa looked troubled. "You know what happened to her, right?" She was never found. This might be the last thing she ever recorded. Maybe the last thing she ever did. Noah nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what they'd discovered, which makes it even more important to understand what she was trying to say. Later that night, alone in his apartment, Noah played the tape again, headphones amplifying every nuance. He'd spent hours researching Evelyn Hart, reading old newspaper articles, interviews, and the sparse information about her disappearance. The official story was frustratingly incomplete, a rising star who simply vanished, with theories ranging from suicide to a nervous breakdown to foul play. But this recording changed everything. Evelyn hadn't just disappeared. She'd left a deliberate breadcrumb trail, a final testament. The question was, why? And what had happened to her afterward? As the tape played, Noah closed his eyes, focusing on the 4 descending notes that appeared as a motif throughout the song, and a minor fall, repeated like a secret code. They felt familiar somehow, significant. Suddenly, Noah sat bolt upright. He knew where he'd heard that pattern before. Grabbing his laptop, he searched until he found a recording of The River Stays Silent, the last song Evelyn had performed at the Blue Canary Club before vanishing. The same 4-note motif appeared there too, though buried deeper in the orchestration. It wasn't just a musical phrase. It was a signature, a deliberate connection between her final public performance and this hidden recording. Noah stared at his reflection in the darkened window of his apartment. 70 years after she disappeared, Evelyn Hart was speaking directly to him. The tape wasn't just a recording, it was a message in a bottle, flung into the future in the desperate hope that someday someone would hear it and understand. And now he had found it. Noah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Evelyn Hart had vanished without a trace after making this recording. What had she known? What had she feared? And who had she been running from? The answers, he was certain, were hidden somewhere in the grooves of this magnetic tape. He just needed to listen closely enough to hear them. The first person Noah contacted was Dr. Elise Montgomery, a professor of musicology at Tulane who specialized in early jazz and blues recordings. They met in her cluttered campus office, surrounded by vinyl records and vintage audio equipment. "This is extraordinary," she said after listening to the tape. "I've studied Evelyn Hart's work for 20 years, and I've never heard this recording, or even heard of it." She removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "Where did you say you found this?" "Abandoned radio station in Baton Rouge. It was in a sealed cabinet, almost like someone had deliberately hidden it." Dr. Montgomery nodded. "It's not hard to see why. Listen to the emotional quality, the vulnerability, the subtle shifts in phrasing. This isn't a performance, it's a confession." Noah leaned forward. "That's exactly what I thought, but a confession of what?" "I'm not sure." She pressed a button, rewinding to a specific section. "But these 4 notes that keep recurring, they're what we call a lament bass, a musical pattern associated with mourning, descending stepwise to express grief. Bach used it, as did countless jazz musicians, but Evelyn's using it almost as punctuation, separating verses like a secret code. Could it be a message of some kind? Possibly. Musicians have long used music to encode messages. During slavery, spirituals contained hidden instructions for escape routes. During World War II, resistance fighters embedded coordinates in seemingly innocent folk songs. She paused the tape. The question is, who was Evelyn's message for, and why encode it at all? To answer that question, Noah needed to understand Evelyn herself, not just the public persona, but the woman behind the voice. He spent the next week immersed in archives, tracking down anyone who might have known her. Most were long gone, but at the New Orleans Jazz Museum, curator Jerome Williams introduced him to his mother, Lucille, who had worked as a cigarette girl at the Blue Canary in the early 1950s. "Oh, Miss Evelyn," Lucille Williams sighed, her 90-year-old hand smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. "Beautiful voice, beautiful soul, but so sad behind those eyes." "What do you remember about her final weeks?" Noah asked gently. "She changed," Lucille said. "Used to be friendly, always had time for the staff. Then she started coming in looking tired, jumping at shadows. Wouldn't talk to reporters anymore. Lane, that was her manager, he started showing up to every performance, watching from the wings like a hawk." She leaned closer. "Week before she vanished, I found her crying in the ladies' room. She said, 'My voice isn't mine anymore, Lucy. He's taken everything.'" "Lane?" Lucille nodded. "Had to be. He controlled everything. Her schedule, her money, even who she could talk to. Some called him her Svengali, but that's too kind. He was a spider, and she was caught in his web." Noah made notes. "Did she ever mention recording something secretly? Something that might have been dangerous for her?" Lucille's eyes widened slightly. "Not to me, but Clara might know. They were close." "Clara Fielding? The pianist?" Noah's pulse quickened. "Is she still alive?" "Last I heard, she was in that fancy nursing home in the Garden District. Hasn't played piano in 50 years, though. Not since Evelyn." The isolation Evelyn experienced in her final weeks became a recurring theme as Noah pieced together interviews. She had begun canceling rehearsals, avoiding eye contact, humming those same 4 notes repeatedly. Photos from her final month showed a woman whose smile had become a performance of its own, perfect for the camera, empty behind the eyes. At the Times-Picayune archives, Noah found the last interview Evelyn had given, 3 weeks before she vanished. The reporter had noted, "Miss Hart seems distracted during our conversation, her answers polished but mechanical. When asked about her future plans, she stares out the window for so long I wonder if she's heard the question. Finally, she replies, 'My voice will outlast all of this. That's the one thing he can't control.'" The interviewer had assumed she meant time itself would be defeated by her recordings. Now Noah wondered if she had been referring to someone much more specific and much more dangerous. Most revealing was Evelyn's diary, preserved in the Louisiana Historical Society's collection. The entries became increasingly cryptic in her final month. October 29, 1953, Vi says Chicago deal is set. Don't trust him. The numbers don't add up. November 5th, contract renewal next week. He's added new clauses, perpetuity, all rights to name and likeness, can't do it. November 12th, met with L today. Says there's a way out, but risky. Better than staying. November 17th, when they take your voice, they take your name. Won't let that happen. Insurance ready. November 19th, final show tonight. If it works, freedom. If not, the entry ended there, unfinished. November 19th was the night she disappeared. Noah took all these fragments back to his apartment, creating a timeline on his living room wall. Photographs, interview excerpts, diary entries. A pattern emerged of a woman increasingly trapped, increasingly desperate, and increasingly determined to break free from whatever or whoever was controlling her. The spotlight had created a shadow, and in that shadow, Evelyn Hart had found herself becoming a stranger, a commodity rather than an artist, an asset rather than a person. Her isolation wasn't accidental. It was engineered by those who stood to profit from her voice while silencing the woman behind it. That night, Noah listened to the tape again, this time with new understanding. The whispered, "I can't stay," wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of intent. Evelyn hadn't vanished. She had escaped. Or at least she had tried to. The Louisiana State Archives kept corporate records dating back to the early 1900s. Noah spent 3 days there, tracing Victor Lane's business activities and the complex web of contracts that had bound Evelyn Hart to him. What he found was a masterclass in exploitation. The original contract, signed when Evelyn was just 24, granted Lane exclusive rights to all performances, recordings, and public appearances in exchange for development of artistic career and financial compensation, as determined by industry standards. Those industry standards proved malleable. Financial records showed Evelyn receiving approximately 15% of her earnings, with the rest going to management fees, promotional expenses, and production costs, all controlled by Lane. But it was the contract renewal, scheduled for November 1953, that revealed Lane's true intentions. The new terms, never signed due to Evelyn's disappearance, included clauses granting him rights in perpetuity to her stage name, voice recordings, and likeness. Had she signed, Evelyn would have legally ceased to own herself. Most disturbing was a clause buried in legal jargon on page 17. Artist agrees that all creative works, including musical compositions, arrangements, and lyrics, shall be credited at manager's discretion to maximize commercial potential. In practice, this meant Lane could, and did, claim authorship of songs Evelyn had written. "It's insidious," explained Martin Cohen, the copyright attorney Noah consulted. These contracts were common in the era, especially for women and artists of color. They created a form of indentured servitude disguised as opportunity. Once signed, artists had virtually no recourse. But she was trying to break free, Noah said. Her diary mentions meeting with someone, just L, about finding a way out. Cohen nodded. Probably a lawyer. In the 50s, the only viable legal strategy would have been proving fraud or coercion, both difficult to establish without significant evidence. What if she had evidence? A recording of some kind? The attorney's eyebrows rose. That could change everything. Recorded evidence of financial mismanagement or threats could invalidate the contract. If Lane realized she had such proof, he didn't need to finish the thought. Motive crystallized in Noah's mind. A manager facing not just the loss of his most profitable artist, but potential exposure of years of fraud. The next piece of the puzzle came from the Chicago Tribune archives. A small announcement from January 1954. Richard Vaughn, formerly of New Orleans, has established Meridian Records, bringing Southern talent to Chicago's vibrant jazz scene. An accompanying photograph showed a man Noah instantly recognized from Evelyn Hart clippings, Victor Lane, now using a different name. Within months of Evelyn's disappearance, Lane had reinvented himself. Meridian Records quickly signed several female jazz vocalists who enjoyed moderate success before abruptly leaving the industry. One, Marianne Wilson, gave a single interview in 1956 before vanishing from public life. Mr. Vaughn has a particular way of doing business. Those who don't comply find there are no more bookings, no more records, no more career. The pattern was clear. Lane Vaughn had a history of controlling artists through contractual manipulation and intimidation. Evelyn hadn't been his first victim, but she might have been the first to truly threaten his system. Armed with this context, Noah traveled to Chicago, hoping to track Lane's movements after his relocation. The Meridian Records building had long since been converted to condominiums, but city property records revealed something intriguing. In addition to the studio, Lane had purchased a large home in the suburbs with unusual specifications. The previous owner was a recording engineer, explained the county clerk, pulling up the original building plans. He'd converted the basement into a soundproofed studio space, completely isolated, with its own ventilation and power supply. Noah studied the blueprints, feeling a chill. Any record of renovations after Lane? Sorry, Vaughn, bought it? Nothing filed officially. but there's a note about a complaint from a neighbor in 1955. Something about construction noise and concrete deliveries over several nights. She shrugged. Nothing came of it. Vaughn was well connected. Concrete deliveries. Soundproofed basement. Noah's mind filled with dark possibilities. Back in New Orleans, he connected another crucial dot. The Blue Canary Club's original floor plans, filed with the city in 1949, showed something odd. A small recording booth hidden behind the main stage, accessible only through the manager's office. Henry Duval had died in 1978, but his son, Robert, still owned property in the French Quarter. Noah tracked him down at a jazz club on Frenchman Street. "Oh yeah, Dad mentioned that booth," Robert recalled, nursing a bourbon. "Lane insisted on it when he bought into the club. Said it was for private auditions, but everyone knew he used it to record. Performers without paying union rates. Had some fancy German equipment in there. State of the art for the time." "Could someone have recorded there the night Evelyn disappeared?" Noah asked. Robert considered this. "Sure, if they had access. The booth was soundproofed. You wouldn't hear anything from the main floor." "And Evelyn would have known about it?" "Of course. Dad said she recorded some of her early demos there before getting proper studio time." Another piece clicked into place. What if the insurance policy Evelyn had mentioned in her diary wasn't just the Baton Rouge radio station recording, but something made earlier that same night? Something recorded in the hidden booth at the Blue Canary? Noah returned to the tape, listening again with fresh understanding. There was a moment, roughly 2 minutes in, when the quality of the recording shifted subtly, a change in room acoustics, as if the microphone had been moved or a different recording spliced in. Dr. Montgomery confirmed his suspicion. "This section here, it has different ambient characteristics. It's the same voice, same song, but recorded in a different space. I'd bet anything this tape is actually a compilation of at least 2 separate recordings spliced together." "She was creating a record," Noah said slowly, "of both locations. Proof she'd been in 2 places that night. Which might explain why someone went to such lengths to hide this tape," Dr. Montgomery added. "It contradicts the official narrative of her disappearance." The mystery was deepening, the shadows lengthening around Evelyn's final hours. But one crucial witness remained, someone who might still hold the key to what had really happened that night. Clara Fielding, the pianist. The last person known to have spoken to Evelyn before her final performance. Noah needed to find her, before the truth of Evelyn Hart's disappearance was lost forever. The Garden District retirement community sat behind wrought iron gates, its manicured lawns, and colonial architecture suggesting luxury and careful maintenance. Noah had called ahead, explaining his research to the administrator who had reluctantly agreed to ask Ms. Fielding if she would speak with him. "She rarely accepts visitors," the administrator warned, "and she doesn't discuss her music career. Just so you're prepared." Noah nodded, adjusting his tie. He'd dressed formally out of respect, carrying a small portable player with the mysterious tape. As he was led through hushed corridors to a sunroom overlooking the gardens, he rehearsed his approach. He would need to be gentle but direct. At 90, Clara Fielding represented perhaps the last living connection to Evelyn Hart. The woman who waited in the sunroom hardly matched Noah's mental image of a jazz pianist. Tiny and bird-like, Clara Fielding's hands bore the swollen joints of arthritis, her white hair arranged in a neat bun. But her eyes, sharp blue and clear, missed nothing as she assessed her visitor. "You're the young man asking about Evelyn," she said, her voice stronger than her fragile appearance suggested. "I haven't spoken about her in decades. Why disturb old ghosts now?" Noah sat in the chair she indicated. "Because I found something, Miss Fielding. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about her disappearance." He explained the discovery of the tape, watching her expression carefully. Clara revealed nothing, her face a practiced mask. "Many people have claimed to find clues over the years," she said. "Reporters, historians, true crime enthusiasts. I stopped engaging after the 10th book promised the real story." "I'm not writing a book," Noah said. "I just want to understand what happened. And I think you know." Clara's hands tensed slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Because you were the last person to speak with her before her final performance. Because she trusted you enough to tell you, if this one goes missing, they'll find all of me in it. Because you never performed again after she disappeared." Her eyes narrowed. "You've done your research." "I'd like to play you something," Noah said, setting up the portable player. "Something I believe Evelyn recorded the night she vanished." Clara didn't respond, but she didn't refuse either. Noah pressed play. The first notes filled the sunroom, and Clara Fielding closed her eyes. Her hands moved slightly, fingers remembering piano keys from 7 decades earlier. When Evelyn's voice began, a single tear tracked down the old woman's cheek. They sat in silence as the recording played. When it ended, Clara didn't speak for a long moment, her eyes still closed, as though listening to echoes only she could hear. "That song," she finally said, voice barely audible, "wasn't meant for the crowd. She recorded it because she knew she wouldn't leave alive." Noah felt a chill. "What do you mean?" Clara opened her eyes, suddenly looking every one of her 90 years. "You've figured out most of it, haven't you? Victor Lane, the contracts, the control. But you don't know what Evelyn discovered that final week. Tell me." She found ledgers, proof that Victor had been systematically stealing from her for years, not just skimming from her earnings, but claiming authorship of her songs, selling her recordings overseas under different names, even licensing her image for advertisements she never approved. Hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden in accounts she never knew existed. Noah nodded. Her diary mentioned numbers that don't add up. She confronted him 3 days before that final show. He threatened her, said if she broke her contract, he'd make sure she never performed again. But Evelyn had changed. She wasn't frightened anymore. She was angry. So she planned to expose him? Clara's laugh held no humor. Not just expose him, destroy him. The L in her diary wasn't a lawyer. It was Louis Martinez, an audio engineer who'd worked with her on her first album. He helped her plan something brilliant and desperate. The recordings, Noah breathed. Not just evidence of financial fraud, but something more. Evelyn was going to use Victor's own methods against him. She knew about the hidden recording booth at the Blue Canary. He'd used it for years to record artists without paying them properly. That night, she planted a microphone in his office before her final show. Then, during their post-performance meeting, she confronted him with what she'd found. Got him to admit everything while the tape was running. "That's the insurance policy she mentioned?" Clara nodded. The plan was to record his confession, then immediately record herself at the WJBW studio as a backup, time-stamped proof of what had happened. Lewis was supposed to meet her there, take both recordings, and deliver them to the district attorney the next morning. Her voice broke slightly. "He waited at the station for hours. She never arrived." "But the tape did," Noah said. "At least part of it. That's what I found. Lewis must have spliced what he had, her WJBW session, with whatever other recording he could find, a final record of her voice." Clara's eyes grew distant. Victor must have realized what she'd done. After she left his office that night, she didn't need to finish. Noah could fill in the terrible gap in the narrative. "There's something encoded in this recording, isn't there?" The 4 repeated notes. They meant something. Clara's fingers moved again, mimicking the piano sequence. EHBB, musical notes that correspond to letters. EH are her initials. The BB sequence was our code for Victor. She's signing her testimony and naming her accuser over and over throughout the song. Did you tell the police this? Of course, but without the tape, without a body, they couldn't move against someone with Victor's connections. When he reappeared in Chicago as Richard Vaughn, it was as though Victor Lane had never existed. Her voice hardened. And Evelyn Hart officially became another tragic casualty of fame, a narrative Victor himself helped craft through carefully placed rumors about her mental state. Noah's mind was racing. The hidden recording booth at the club, it doesn't exist anymore, does it? The building was renovated in the 70s. If there was anything left there, it's long gone. But Victor, or Richard, had another private studio in his Chicago home, a soundproofed basement that received concrete deliveries in 1955. Clara's face went very still. Then you know what I've suspected for 70 years. She reached for Noah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. If you're going to pursue this, be careful. Evelyn's recording survived, but she didn't. Victor Lane may be gone, but systems that silence women haven't changed. They've just adapted. As Noah left the retirement home, Clara's final words echoed in his mind. Listen to the very end of the tape, after the song finishes. There's a whispered outro we never heard publicly. She says, "He's still here." Not past tense, present. As though she knew he was listening, even as she recorded her final testimony. That night, Noah did as Clara suggested, playing the tape to its very end. After several seconds of apparent silence following the song's conclusion, he heard it. Evelyn's voice, barely a whisper. "He's still here." The hairs on Noah's arms stood on end. Those 3 words transformed the recording from historical artifact to crime scene evidence. What had been a testimony became a woman's last words, captured as danger closed in around her. Evelyn's voice had survived for 70 years, preserved in magnetic particles on acetate film. Her final song wasn't just art, it was resistance, evidence, testimony. Now the question became, what should Noah do with it? Noah's apartment transformed over the following weeks. The living room wall, once decorated with framed jazz posters, now held a complex timeline of Evelyn Hart's final days. Red string connected photographs to document scans to handwritten notes. Audio waveforms printed from the mysterious tape hung beside enlarged sections of architectural blueprints. He had stopped answering most calls, responding to emails with brief, distracted replies. Sleep came in short bursts between intensive listening sessions. Sometimes he woke unsure if he'd been dreaming of Evelyn or actually hearing her voice from the tape player he now kept beside his bed. "You need perspective," Vanessa told him during one of her increasingly frequent check-in visits. She stood in his kitchen, washing dishes he'd neglected for days. "This obsession isn't healthy." "It's not obsession," Noah countered, though the state of his apartment argued otherwise. "It's thoroughness. I can't publish anything about this until I'm certain." "Certain of what exactly? That Victor Lane killed Evelyn Hart?" "The man died in 1986. Even if you prove it, what justice is possible now?" "This isn't about punishing Lane. It's about restoring Evelyn's voice, her actual voice, not the manufactured story that erased her." Noah ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "She left this testimony for a reason. She deserves to be heard." Vanessa sighed, her expression softening. "I know, just don't lose yourself in this. Evelyn's story is important, but so is yours." After Vanessa left, Noah returned to the tape. He'd been working with Marcus Chen, an audio engineer specializing in forensic sound analysis, who had discovered something unexpected. "This recording has multiple layers," Marcus explained over video call, his screen showing spectral analysis of the audio. "Not just the splicing we already identified, but actual physical layers on the tape itself." What does that mean? It means someone recorded over portions of the original tape at a later date. See these frequency anomalies? Marcus highlighted sections of the waveform. They show manipulation, a second recording, pass that adds something to the original. Could it be restoration work? Maybe Louis Martinez trying to clean up the audio? Marcus shook his head. This isn't enhancement, it's addition. There's another voice faintly audible beneath Evelyn's in certain sections, male, repeating phrases that sound like "don't leave" and "mine." But here's the weird part. The voice was added years after the original recording, based on the magnetic signature and tape degradation patterns. Noah felt a chill. You're saying someone took Evelyn's tape and deliberately altered it? Added another voice? Exactly. And given the technology markers, this secondary layer was added sometime in the early 1970s, at least 15 years after Evelyn's original recording. The implications were disturbing. Someone had possessed this tape for decades, periodically manipulating it, adding their own voice to Evelyn's, a form of possession that continued long after her physical presence had ended. Noah's research intensified. He tracked Richard Vaughn's career through the 1960s and 70s, discovering a pattern of female artists who briefly flourished under his management before disappearing from public life. None had Evelyn's brilliance, but all followed a similar trajectory: initial success, growing isolation, and eventual obscurity explained away by personal issues or artistic differences. Most telling was Vaughn's Chicago mansion. Property records showed extensive renovations in 1954-55, including unexplained electrical work and additional soundproofing in the basement studio. A former housekeeper, interviewed decades later for a Chicago music history project, mentioned that the basement was always locked, with only Vaughn possessing a key. She also noted his habit of spending hours there alone late at night, often emerging looking satisfied, like he'd accomplished something important. By the third week of his investigation, Noah began experiencing something unsettling. After particularly long sessions listening to the tape, he would hear Evelyn's voice continuing in his head even after stopping the playback, whispered fragments that seemed to respond to his thoughts. "You're just tired," he told himself, making another pot of coffee at 2 a.m. Audio pareidolia, the brain filling in patterns from prolonged exposure. But the sensation persisted. Sometimes he thought he heard the male voice too, distant, threatening, possessive. During one late-night session, he distinctly heard "she's mine," so clearly he spun around, certain someone had spoken directly behind him. The apartment was empty. "This is how it happens," Noah murmured, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. "This is how obsession works. The same pattern that consumed Evelyn in her final days." The parallel was becoming uncomfortably clear. Evelyn's desperate search for freedom had isolated her from friends and colleagues. Now, 70 years later, Noah's quest to uncover her truth was isolating him in the same way, but he couldn't stop. Not when he was so close. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Dr. Montgomery, who had been analyzing the musical structure of Evelyn's final recording. "I've been focusing on the wrong thing," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "It's not just the four-note motif that matters. It's what happens between iterations. There are microtonal shifts, barely perceptible to casual listeners, that create a secondary pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "Coordinates," her voice dropped. "Longitude and latitude, encoded in pitch variations. It's subtle but unmistakable once you know to look for it." Noah felt his heart race. "Coordinates to what?" "I can't be certain, but they point to a location in rural Illinois, about 40 miles outside Chicago." "Victor's country property," Noah breathed. "He maintained a weekend home there. I found tax records, but no address." That night, Noah mapped the coordinates. They led to an area now largely consumed by suburban development, But in the 1950s, it had been isolated farmland. Property records confirmed that Richard Vaughan had owned 20 acres there from 1954 until his death. Current satellite imagery showed a modern subdivision, but historical photographs revealed the original structure. A modest farmhouse with an unusually large detached garage, that county records described as having a full concrete foundation. Concrete. Just like the basement room in the Chicago mansion. Just like the mysterious deliveries noted by neighbors. Noah's hand trembled as he traced the location on his screen. Evelyn's final recording hadn't just been a testimony, it had been a map, leading directly to the place she believed would hold evidence of Lane's crimes. The coded message wasn't just for any listener, it was for someone who would understand what she was trying to say. A message that had waited 70 years to be decoded. As dawn broke, Noah made a decision. He would travel to Chicago and then to those coordinates in Illinois. He would find whatever remained of Victor Lane's rural property and whatever secrets it still held. But first, he made digital copies of all his research, the tape analysis, and his notes, sending them to both Vanessa and Dr. Montgomery with instructions to publish everything if they didn't hear from him within a week. Just a precaution, he wrote in the accompanying email, knowing how paranoid it sounded, but unable to shake the feeling that he was following in dangerous footsteps. As he packed his bag, Noah played the tape one last time. Evelyn's voice filled the room, beautiful and haunting, a bridge across decades. "I hear you," he said aloud to the empty apartment. "I'm coming." In the silence that followed, he could almost swear he heard her whisper back, "Be careful." The pattern was clear. Just as Evelyn had done 70 years earlier, Noah was now walking knowingly into darkness, driven by the same desperate need for truth, regardless of the cost. Chicago greeted Noah with a blast of cold wind that cut through his light jacket. November in the Midwest was unforgiving, the city's famous architecture framed by steel gray skies that threatened snow. It felt appropriate somehow. This harsh, beautiful city that had swallowed Victor Lane's secrets for decades. His first stop was the Cook County Archives, where property records confirmed what he already suspected. Victor Lane, operating as Richard Vaughan, had owned both the Chicago mansion and the rural Illinois property simultaneously. Most interesting was the timing. He had purchased the rural property just 6 weeks after relocating from New Orleans. "That's unusual," commented the archivist, a precise woman with silver-rimmed glasses. "Most people establish themselves in the city before investing in country property." Noah nodded. "Were there any building permits filed for the rural location?" "Just one, in December 1954, for a storage facility with concrete foundation." She peered at the yellowed document. "Construction completed February 1955, inspected and approved by—" "Oh, that's interesting." "What is?" "The building inspector who signed off was Gerald Kavanaugh. He was later indicted for accepting bribes to approve substandard construction." She looked up. This would have been during the period when he was known to be corrupt. Another piece clicked into place. A rushed construction project, an inspector known for looking the other way. It painted a disturbing picture of what might have been built on that isolated property. Noah's next destination was the Chicago Tribune archives. The newspaper had covered Richard Vaughan extensively as he became an influential figure in the city's music scene. Most articles portrayed him as a visionary producer who had discovered extraordinary talent and revolutionized Chicago jazz. But in a society column from 1956, Noah found something revealing. A photograph of Vaughan at a charity gala, accompanied by a striking young singer named Marianne Wilson. The caption noted that Wilson was Meridian Records' rising star, whose haunting voice has drawn comparisons to the legendary Evelyn Hart. The resemblance was unsettling, not identical, but close enough that someone familiar with Evelyn might have done a double take, Same hairstyle, similar dress, comparable stage presence. It was as if Vaughn had tried to recreate Evelyn with a new vessel. Even more disturbing was what Noah found in Marianne Wilson's contract, preserved in the Chicago Music Industry Collection, clauses nearly identical to those in Evelyn's proposed renewal, including complete control of her image, voice recordings, and professional identity. But Wilson's career had been brief, just 18 months of growing popularity before she abruptly retired due to health concerns. No further public appearances, no interviews, no explanation. The pattern repeated with 3 more singers over the next decade, each resembling Evelyn in some way, each disappearing from public life after brief success. None had achieved Evelyn's level of artistry, but they shared something beyond their look. All had worked exclusively with Vaughn, all had signed similar contracts, and all had vanished from the industry under vague circumstances. Noah's research led him to one final, crucial discovery. Among Richard Vaughn's personal effects, auctioned after his death in 1986, was a collection of reel-to-reel tapes labeled simply EH Sessions. The buyer had been a private collector who later donated them to Northwestern University's music department. Noah's hands shook as he filled out the request form for access to the collection. Hours later, in a small listening room, he heard Victor Lane's voice for the first time, commanding, smooth, with an undercurrent of cruelty that made Noah's skin crawl. Again, from the bridge, Lane ordered on the tape. A female voice, not Evelyn's, tried to comply, wavering on a difficult passage. "No," Lane snapped. "Listen to the reference track. Match it precisely." There followed the sound of another tape being played, and Noah froze as Evelyn Hart's unmistakable voice filled the room. The reference track was Evelyn, singing the very passage the other woman was struggling to imitate. The collection contained dozens of such recordings, Lane coaching replacement singers to mimic Evelyn's phrasing, tone, and style. In some sessions, his frustration was palpable as the singers failed to capture what he wanted. In others, his satisfaction was equally evident when they came close to replicating her sound. Most disturbing were the late-night sessions labeled EH Direct. These contained one-sided conversations where Lane spoke to someone who never responded verbally, asking questions, demanding answers, growing increasingly agitated at the silence. "I know you can hear me," he said in one such recording. "You think you've hidden away, but you're mine, always mine. Your voice belongs to me." The recordings spanned decades, from the mid-1950s all the way to the early 1980s, shortly before Vaughn's death. The obsession had never waned, never diminished. For 30 years, he had continued speaking to Evelyn as though she could hear him. Through voice analysis, Noah and Marcus confirmed what they had suspected. The male voice embedded in Evelyn's last take matched these recordings. Lane had taken her final testimony and contaminated it with his own voice, a possessive act that continued their relationship long after her physical presence had ended. The evidence was overwhelming. Lane hadn't just silenced Evelyn Hart, he had continued to possess and control her legacy decades after her disappearance. The tape Noah had found was both testimony and crime scene, the actual moment when Evelyn had tried to break free, unknowingly recording what might have been her final hours. That night in his hotel room, Noah made the final preparations for his trip to the rural Illinois coordinates. The property had been developed into a subdivision in the 1990s, but the storage facility location now appeared to be a community park, according to maps. Whatever physical evidence might have existed was likely long gone, but Noah had to see it for himself. As he packed, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Vanessa's name. "Noah, you need to stop this," she said without preamble, her voice tense with worry. "This isn't just academic anymore. You're investigating a murder." "I know," he replied, surprised by the calmness in his own voice. "That's why it matters. Evelyn deserves the truth to be told." "At what cost? You're following the exact path she took: isolation, obsession, walking knowingly into danger." Noah glanced at the hotel room wall, where he'd recreated a smaller version of his apartment timeline. "I'm just going to look at a park that used to be Lane's property. There's no danger there." "The danger isn't in the place," Vanessa insisted. "It's in the pattern. You're being consumed by this, just like she was. Come home, publish what you've found, let the authorities handle the rest." "The authorities had their chance 70 years ago," Noah said. "They failed her. I won't." After hanging up, Noah stood at the window, looking out at Chicago's illuminated skyline. Vanessa was right about the pattern. He could see it clearly. Evelyn's desperate search for freedom had led her into isolation and danger. Now he was traveling the same path, driven by the same need to expose a truth that had remained buried for too long. But unlike Evelyn, he wasn't alone. He had shared his research, created backups, established a safety network. If something happened to him, the truth would still emerge. Tomorrow, he would visit those coordinates. He would stand where Evelyn might have stood in her final hours, complete the circuit she had begun 70 years ago. As he turned from the window, the hotel room television flickered to life by itself, static hissing from the speakers. Noah froze, staring at the screen as the static gradually resolved into a pattern, waveforms that matched the spectral analysis of Evelyn's final recording. For several seconds, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the television went dark. Technical glitch, he told himself. Crossed signals. Nothing supernatural or significant. Yet as he lay awake that night, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that he had received a message, a warning, or an invitation. He wasn't sure which. The line between investigation and obsession had blurred completely, rationality giving way to something deeper and more dangerous. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. He would complete Evelyn's interrupted journey and finally uncover what had silenced the nightingale of New Orleans. Morning brought light snow to the Chicago suburbs, dusting the landscape with white as Noah drove his rental car toward the coordinates embedded in Evelyn's final recording. The GPS led him through increasingly residential areas, past identical houses with manicured lawns, until he reached the Lakeview Estates subdivision. At the center of the development sat a small community park, approximately where Victor Lane's storage facility would have stood in the 1950s. Noah parked and walked slowly across the frost-covered grass, trying to imagine the isolated property as it had been 70 years earlier. The park contained a playground, a gazebo, and a small man-made pond. Nothing remarkable, nothing that suggested its potentially dark history. Noah consulted his phone, checking the precise coordinates against his current location. They led to the pond. Noah stood at the water's edge, watching snow melt as it touched the dark surface. The small body of water was perfectly circular, approximately 30 feet across, roughly the dimensions of a large underground chamber. A chill that had nothing to do with the November air ran through him. The storage facility hadn't been removed during development. It had been filled with water, transformed into a decorative feature that hid its original purpose beneath a reflective surface. "Excuse me, are you Noah Grant?" A voice behind him made Noah turn. An elderly man with a cane approached, bundled against the cold. "I'm Howard Jessup. Vanessa Liu contacted me, said you might be visiting." "You know Vanessa?" Noah asked, confused. "Not directly. She tracked me down through the Historical Society." The man gestured to a nearby bench. "Mind if we sit? My legs aren't what they used to be." Once seated, Howard continued, I was the construction foreman for this subdivision back in '93. Vanessa mentioned you were researching the history of this property, particularly the original Vaughn estate. That's right, Noah said cautiously. Did you know about the previous structures when you developed this land? Howard's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. Oh, we knew. That's why the pond is there. He pointed toward the water. When we began excavation, we discovered a concrete bunker, fully reinforced, with walls 2 feet thick. It would have cost a fortune to demolish, so the developers decided to seal the entrance, remove the roof, and turn it into a water feature. Did you find anything inside the bunker? Noah asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Howard was quiet for a moment, looking out over the pond. Nothing I was supposed to talk about. The developers were clear. What we found stayed buried. But you remember? Some things you don't forget, no matter how much you'd like to. He sighed. There was a room within the main chamber, smaller, completely soundproofed. Inside, we found recording equipment, decades old, but sophisticated for its time. And on the walls, he paused. Photographs, dozens of them, all of the same woman, arranged like some kind of shrine. Evelyn Hart, Noah whispered. Howard nodded. I recognized her from my mother's old records. Beautiful singer. But these weren't publicity photos. They were surveillance shots. Evelyn entering buildings, walking on streets, sitting in restaurants. Like someone had been following her for years. Noah's mouth went dry. Was there anything else? The old man hesitated. A collection of reel-to-reel tapes labeled with dates spanning decades. And in the corner of the room, a chair bolted to the floor with restraints attached. The implications were horrific. Not just murder, but prolonged captivity. A private space where Victor Lane could maintain the illusion of control over the woman who had tried to escape him. What happened to everything you found? Noah asked. Corporate lawyers showed up within hours. Everything was removed, cataloged, and taken away. We were all required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Howard gave a bitter laugh. Not that it mattered. Who would believe such a story without evidence? But you're telling me now. I'm 87 years old, Mr. Grant. What can they do to me at this point? He reached into his coat and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Besides, I kept something they missed, found it wedged behind a control panel. Inside the envelope was a single photograph. Evelyn Hart, seated at a piano, looking directly at the camera with an expression of defiance rather than fear. On the back, written in a delicate hand, My voice will outlast your silence, E.H. Thank you, Noah said, carefully placing the photograph in his coat pocket. This means more than you know. Howard nodded gravely. Whatever story you're piecing together, I suspect it's even darker than you imagine. Men like Vaughn, they don't just kill, they erase, they possess. After Howard left, Noah remained on the bench, staring at the innocent-looking pond that concealed such terrible secrets. The complete picture was finally clear, and it was more horrifying than he had imagined. Victor Lane hadn't just silenced Evelyn Hart, he had tried to preserve her, or his version of her, in a concrete chamber hidden from the world. The recordings spanning decades, the conversations with someone who never responded, the obsessive recreation of her sound through other singers. It painted a picture of possession rather than mere murder. Evelyn's final recording had been her attempt to break free, to leave evidence of Lane's crimes, and perhaps to lead someone eventually to this very spot. Now, 70 years later, Noah had completed the circuit she had begun. He had decoded her message, followed her map, and uncovered the truth she had died trying to reveal. Back in his hotel room, Noah laid out everything he had discovered. The contracts, the financial evidence, the tape analyses, Howard's testimony, and the newly found photograph. Together, they told a story of exploitation, obsession, and silencing that extended far beyond a single missing jazz singer. It was a story about the systems that allowed powerful men to control women's voices, bodies, and legacies, about how the music industry had built its foundation on talent it often abused and discarded, about how Evelyn Hart's disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy, but part of a pattern that had repeated with other women under Lane's control. Most importantly, it was a story about a voice that had refused to stay silenced, that had encoded its own testimony into a song meant to outlast its oppressor. Noah began writing. The article flowed from him in a torrent of words, weaving together historical research, musical analysis, and the dark revelations of the past weeks. He titled it simply, "The Last Note, the Voice They Tried to Bury." As dawn broke, he sent the completed article to his editor, along with authenticated copies of Evelyn's final recording, the spectral analyses proving Lane's later interference, and photographs of the concrete chamber's location. Within hours, the piece was being rushed into publication, accompanied by a digitally restored version of The Last Take that removed Lane's intrusive voice, allowing Evelyn's testimony to be heard clearly for the first time in 70 years. The response was immediate and overwhelming.